Look what he says in 4:3. So with us, when we were minors, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the cosmos, of the world. This term elemental spirits goes back to something I talked about previously. I think it was in my lecture when I talked about Stephen's speech in Acts. This is that Greek word stoicheia. Stoicheia is a very, very big, major Greek word. It can be used in all kinds of ways. For one thing, it just referred to ranks of soldiers. If soldiers were lined up in different ranks, those ranks were stoicheia, rows. It could refer to all kinds of other rows. It could refer to letters of an alphabet. That could be talked about as stoicheia. Because what you do, you put all the letters of the alphabet in a row, and there are different elements. So stoicheia also could refer to what we would call chemical elements. The table of elements, those would be called stoicheia in Greek. So for example, they took wind, fire, water, and air. Sometimes there were other four, earth sometimes. You've heard this theory, right? That the Greeks believed, and the ancient people believed there were four fundamental elements of all matter. And those are, sometimes they said 6, sometimes 8, sometimes others, but quite often they'd settle on 4 classical elements. And they believed that everything was made up of some combination of earth, fire, water, and air. And so everything's some matter, though. The thicker stuff has more earth in it and less air. The lighter stuff has more air in it and less earth. But all matter is made up of these 4 elements. So these elements constitute the whole cosmos. But what's really interesting is, at least a lot of people in the ancient world believed that this term also referred to the sort of angelic or demonic or godlike beings who constitute the universe also. In other words, they didn't believe necessarily that air was simply an inert material. It also was a god or some kind of demonic being. So, or some people would say that each of these different layers of the universe, say the layer that is earth, or the layer that is water, or the layer that is air, or the top layer that is fire or ether, that those are all divine beings themselves, or they could talk about them as being not divine beings themselves, but being ruled by divine beings. So even Jews, for example, would think that there were certain angels who were in charge of different rows of the universe. So, for example, and this is what we talked about Gnosticism, if you wanted to go to God, according to some magical text, for example, you had to figure out the tricks to go through the different ranks of demons or angels that lived in the sky between you and God. And one way to do that is to learn secret passwords. So magical texts often will give you what look like passwords, because if you have this password, and when your soul is flying up to God, you can give the password to whatever demon or angel is guarding different gates between you and God. So the stoicheia refers to elements of the universe in a physical sense, but it also refers to these spiritual beings that rule the cosmos, or even make up the stuff of the cosmos in a lot of ancient thought. But now notice what Paul is saying here. When we were under the law, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the universe. Being under the law is being enslaved to these. And he says, you want to go back to that slavery? But wait a minute, what are the Galatians doing? They're not saying we want to go back and serve idols. What Paul is saying is, when you served idols, you were actually serving the stoicheia of the universe. They weren't real gods, they were fake gods. Either some kind of angelic beings or demonic beings. Paul, I think, believed they were real beings behind idols, but they were demons or something like that. And the stoicheia were those. The Galatians are not wanting to go back to idol worship, apparently. What are they wanting to do? They're just thinking, well, we're going to keep the Jewish law. But Paul, not they, equates keeping the Jewish law, if you're a Gentile, with going back to idolatry. That is radical. For any Jew in the first century to equate law observance, keeping kosher, being circumcised, with actually worshiping idols, that's radical. And yet that's what Paul's doing here in Galatians. Notice then what he does. I'd say that because in 4:8 he says, formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to beings that are by nature not gods. That is, you're enslaved to demons or some kind of other being like that. Now, however, that you've come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and beggarly stoicheia? So he's equating their attempt to keep kosher or be circumcised with their returning to idolatry. 7:12. Romans 7:12. He says, back up one verse to verse 11, for sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So notice what happens here. Sin is talked about as this agent of the cosmos. Sin is almost like one of these sort of stoicheia, kind of an intelligent being. This is actually a debate among scholars of Paul. Some people really believe that sin is a hypostatized, intelligent being of some sort in the cosmos. Other people say, no, Paul's talking metaphorically when he talks about sin in these words, and we need to see sin not as this actual hypostatized being, but simply a metaphor, metaphorized as a being. So scholars themselves debate about what Paul means when he talks about sin as this agent, but at least he talks about sin as the agent who uses the commandment, uses the law. Where was I? 7:12? Yeah. Where was I just reading? 7:11, yes. Sin, seizing an opportunity in the commandment, so sin uses the commandment to deceive the human beings and kill them. Paul's not talking about himself personally here. He's talking about himself as a representative of all human beings.